If the Broncos lose, which I think is the more expected outcome here, Denver then falls to 2-5, and we will be about a week and a half away from the NFL trade deadline, and the name Von Miller, superstar pass rusher, will start to be spoken very loudly in league circles.
There are a couple people on Denver's roster that trades. Teams have an eye on for trade acquisitions, but obviously the biggest one would be Von Miller. And it's a very interesting situation. Denver is telling teams at this point he is not available, but you mentioned we're still 12 days away. 3-4 days ago, Jacksonville was telling teams Jalen Ramsey wasn't available. Now he's on the Rams. So things do change. Von Miller, 2 years left on his contract, but they're both team option years. It's $17.5 million each season. And it's a contract that people could take on. He's a 30-year-old pass rusher who had 14.5 sacks last year, still productive, reasonably priced.
He's 30 years old.
Yes.
Jalen Ramsey just went for 2 number ones. He's a lot younger. What is the price tag would you expect on a trade for Von Miller?
Trying to get a gauge of this, talking to people around the league, I think they could get a first-round pick and possibly more for Von Miller based on the fact that pass rushers don't become available very often, and there's a lot of teams that need them. Last year at the deadline, Dante Fowler got traded from Jacksonville to the Rams for a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick. This is a guy the Jaguars were done with. I mean, it was a low-end acquisition for the Rams, taking a flyer on a guy. Von Miller, an established guy who could impact this year's playoff race.
You look skeptical.
Yeah, I don't see it for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't see Von Miller getting a first, not because he's not worth the talent. Like you said, 14.5 sacks last season. He's still a bad man. But to trade a first-round pick who could be the next Von Miller and not the next because Von Miller's a Hall of Famer, that doesn't make sense. But secondly, Greeny, Von Miller isn't really the issue or the pass rush or the lack thereof. If Denver's 22-32 since they won the Super Bowl. They have so many problems that 1 pick or 2 picks can't address. They have some foundational issues.
See, I disagree because I think if a team that's on that perennial team that's vying for the Super Bowl, who usually picks at the bottom of the first round, why not go after Von Miller? Those type of guys, like you said, pass rushers don't free up often, so he could be a critical piece for a team.
It's interesting. You mentioned Dante Fowler, who felt like they were just giving him away last year. He played a huge role in the Rams making a run to the Super Bowl. Von Miller should definitely be able to do that. Now, I mentioned we're 2 weeks or so from the trade deadline. There are other big names here. Dan Graziano, let's look at some of them. A.J. Green, what are we hearing?
This is the final year of his contract in Cincinnati. Hasn't played yet this year, and obviously the Bengals season is going nowhere at 0-6. So teams have been calling to see if he's available. Again, Cincinnati is telling them no, but things do change as the deadline gets closer and the offers get better. A lot of teams out there looking for a receiver, most prominently the New England Patriots. And if they're involved, a lot of other teams are going to be involved.
Imagine A.J. Green on the Patriots, or maybe this guy. How about Stefon Diggs in Minnesota?
Weird situation here because they're 4-2. They're not in a mode where they're going to be dumping their good players, and his contract is team favorable. But there's been some issues with him the last couple of weeks. You know, he missed a practice. He's had some issues with some things that have been going on there. There's some chatter that maybe he doesn't love that contract he signed last summer. So it's possible, especially if they start losing a couple games here, they could look to maybe make a move that just sort of shakes things up. But they would want another asset in return that could help them this year.
Well, let's look at his season, okay? So through the first 3 games this year, Diggs had just 6 catches and 1 touchdown. But in the last 3 games, he's been completely rejuvenated. You look at the numbers. He's had more catches than he did targets. He's been spectacular and caught 3 touchdowns last week. Stefon Diggs, it feels to me, is a guy that I'm Minnesota. Why would I even be considering this? I think they look like a team that if they get things right, could make a deep run this year.
Imagine, like, that get-back game against the New York Giants did wonders for Kirk Cousins because now he goes on and completely thrashes the Philadelphia Eagles, last week. So, if I'm Minnesota right now, I should be feeling pretty good about what Kirk Cousins is doing and how he's responded to the criticism that he got from his receivers.
Yeah, Diggs ain't going nowhere. I mean, they honestly, Minnesota, they punked Diggs in the first place when he tried to voice his displeasure, and then they fined him, and then he played, and he was like, you know what, I'm happy here. He already got punked. He's not going anywhere, and nor should he, because he balled last week, and he is a flat-out stud.
Well, you were there last week, Graziano. What were people saying?
Look, it's a little bit of a fragile situation. Had they lost that game to the Eagles, I think things would look a lot different. So think about if they lose to Detroit this week, things could start to look different. The whole division is 500 or better. They know it's going to be tough. They've already lost to the Packers and the Bears. It looks good right now. Beat up on the Giants and beat up on the Eagles defense, but it's not 100% solid.
Another big division game for them this week against Detroit. Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports, highlights, and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.